Back up. Let me welcome you back from the lunch break for those of you that were here in the morning, and welcome fresh for those of you that are just joining us this afternoon. My name is Adriana Greci-Green. I am one of the faculty in the Center for Native American Studies, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speakers and presenters, Bettina Washington, who has been the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Wampanoag Tribe at Gayhead, Aquinnah, for the past 2 years, and she's a tribal member born and raised on Nopi, sorry, my apologies, also known as Martha's Vineyard, I suppose. And George Chucky Green is Assistant Director for the Mashpee Wampanoag Natural Resource Department and a Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. He's a former Tribal Vice Chairman and Council Member, and has also served on the Waquat Bay Estuarine Research Reserve, sorry, the Mashpee Conservation Committee, and as the Cape Cod Conservation District Supervisor. So it is my pleasure to turn this over to you.
Yeah, I don't know, how's this go on? You know? Must be a switch. Good afternoon, everybody. First, I want to thank the presenters that went before us. They sort of set the stage for a lot of what we're going to be discussing here this afternoon. And I appreciate the fact that a lot of the issues are close as well. Figured it out. You're the techie, remember? No, I think it's, there you go. All right. All right, we're here this afternoon to discuss the 106 process and the traditional cultural properties, both of which are very important in the discussions that we've had about tribes being able to protect their resources, protect their cultural sites, and protect what's important to tribes. This is sacred to our tribes. We are Wampanoag. We are the people of the first light. An unobstructed view of that sunrise is a part of our ceremony, is a part of our culture. We bless that morning sun, and we pass that on to you here in the West. And we're very proud to be able to do that. All right, what are traditional cultural properties? Traditional cultural properties are places that someone regards as important for its association with cultural practices and beliefs, rooted in the community's history, important in maintaining cultural identity. In order to be who we are, we need to maintain our cultures and we need to teach our cultures. Our biggest problem in Native American society today is the loss of our traditional ceremonies and cultures to our youth. The first thing that we should be thinking about doing is passing on those traditions. And the only way that we can do that is to protect those resources that are going to help us do that. Properties like this extend beyond natives. They extend to all kinds of different communities, as long as the community can connect to it. Okay, now I just want to say, to add to Chucky's comment, when we talk about maintaining our cultural identity, not only is the Nantucket Sound a sacred place as far as our morning ceremonial practices, for the Aquinnah Wampanoag, it is also where we walked from what is now the mainland. That was dry land at one time. So we walked across it when it was a dry land, and our legend tells us that our leader Moshe drew his foot from the ocean so the waters rushed in and created the island of Nopi. So it's a twofold for the Aquinnah Wampanoag. It is that for us too. We know and we can improve 13,000 years of occupation. We know from archaeological research that's been done in the Sound that the Sound was dry 6,000 years ago. So for 6,000 years ago, the Sound filled up with water. 7,000 years before that, our people lived on what is now Nantucket Sound, and the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket and Horseshoe Shoals were hills. We know that our people walked that land. We know that they raised their families, hunted it, fished it, and buried their dead. So that's another reason that that land is sacred to us.
Ready?
These are two shots. The one on the left is mine from Mashpee. Just to give you an idea of what we were talking about as the sunrise. Our sunrise ceremony meets that break when the sun is first breaking that horizon. That's when we do ceremony, and we welcome the sun.
And mine's from, you'll see in a map, we are actually located on the west end of the island. So when we look east, there's a huge hill called Peaked Hill. So we can't see the water coming out, the sun coming out of the water from our reservation land. So we have to travel to the other end of the island, to the Oak Bluffs area, and we can watch that water come out, the sun come out of the water, which is when we talk about your Section 106. This was a detail that Minerals Management Services did not understand.
Early in our consultation with Minerals Management, now you see you took my picture away, with Minerals Management Service, they told us that a body of water could not be considered a traditional cultural property. Well, I'll tell you what. I have a picture of a body of water here, and if there's anybody in the room that can tell me what this body of water is, I would be really impressed. But this body of water is a traditional cultural property. Do I have any takers? Ford? Nope. I'll give you guys a hint. This body of water is a traditional cultural property to a small group of people known as Christians. Even though they couldn't believe us that our land was sacred and that our land was lived on by our people and that we worship that rising sun, they could believe that some guy walked across this to see a Galilee. And it is a traditional cultural. She had it and she held back. Uh-oh. So, I mean, traditional cultural properties are not stuck with just tribes, but tribes have the most difficult time because anyone that thinks that we're on an even playing field, they can give that one up because people, even if we're willing to accept, whether we believe it or not, at least respect the fact that Jesus Christ walked across that water. We at least respect the fact that it is their religion, and they won't do that for us. "106. Second. The reason she sighs is because we've had so much trouble with Section 106. We met up with a group, the MMS, who brought forward a project, Cape Wind Project, 130 wind turbines over 25 square miles of the Sound. And they placed it right in the sight line from sacred sites. That's where they wanted to put it. We looked to them early in the stages to try to initiate consultation. They did like what I hear coming from the last presenter, and they ignored us. They did not pay attention to us. The first statements were made by Cheryl Andrews Maltese, who was the TIPO, and she is now the chairwoman of the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead-Aquina. In 2005, Minerals Management took over from the Army Corps, and things didn't change. They were still ignoring us. They were still not listening at all.
Yeah, 2004, Cheryl contacts Army Corps, and she tells them, I'm now the TIPO, and you are to consult, you to contact me. November of 2004, she writes to the Corps that the Quinawampanoag consider Nantucket Sound a traditional cultural property. 2005, Army Corps, 2005, the laws were changed on account of the shelf. All those authorities were given to MMS. At that point, they come in as the lead federal agency for this project. She contacts them, tells them the same thing. So at this point, this is now 5 years ago. We don't have our first consultation meeting, I believe, until 2007. That is when they actually come to the island, and they come to our reservation lands, which, as I've said, is on the west end of the island. Consultation should be a series of meetings because it should be meaningful. And those words, meaningful, have no definition when it comes to consultation. We found they have no definition. An hour and a half meeting with a tribe and then going to make your decision is not meaningful. There is no way I can put 10,000 years of history, just our history, to you, much less talk in specifics about a site.
I don't know. And then, right after they came from Maquina, they went to the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Council and met with them for an hour and a half. If they had referred to Bulletin 38, Bulletin 38 would have told them sometimes you don't search out traditional knowledge from the political government of a tribe. Sometimes you have to do some more research and find out who are the people that have that traditional knowledge, because it wouldn't be the political leadership of that tribe. They didn't use that.
Because that goes to their level of effort. In our tribe, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer is a duly appointed authority for all cultural inquiries, resources, anything like that. I answer to a Culture and Historic Commission. I have 5 bosses. 3 of them are in the office every day. I don't get away with anything. Which is separate from our tribal government. The tribal government does their thing, we do our thing. So that was one of the lessons that MMS had to learn. They were sending materials to the chair. They don't go to the chair. And this is something federal agencies just do not, I believe, use the tools that are available to them. There are lists from BIA and other websites. The one I'm thinking of is National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. They have all those lists. And those are the sites they should be going to make sure they're contacting the correct people. Because without contacting the correct people, you're not going to get your answers. I don't hold all the answers. I don't pretend I do. That's not my job. My job is to work with the 106 and make sure they're in compliance. And then if someone has a cultural question that I can't answer, that's where I turn to my elders. That's where I turn to the people who have been researching and studying and doing cultural programs for our people. That's my tool. My job is to gather all these things to make these decisions. That's a real level, a real intense and true effort on getting the answers.
Well, from the last slide, something I failed to mention was 36 CFR 800 1C states that an agency must initiate consultation early in the planning stages to allow for adequate alternatives to be reviewed in the planning process. That's one of the strongest parts of the reg, because that's where people get lost and they forget about it. We were in the process 7 years before they started consultation. So they had done so much work out on the sound that they were so far behind the ball, they didn't have any official government-to-government consultation to say that they had talked to the tribes. Then their failure to establish the area of potential effect. When we got to the table, they had an area of potential effect that, well, the first area of potential effect only went to the edge of the water. Then we got to the table and they had taken it back 300 feet to cover some of the properties like the Kennedy compound. I don't know if any of out here in the West have heard of the Kennedy compound, but that's a historic property. So they covered that. Then when asked during our first consultation, how can you set that at 300 feet from the water? And they said, well, we've done the research, and there are no archaeological sites or sacred sites within 300, that are beyond 300 feet of the water, because people were using that. And I said, what about elevated sites? And they said, no, PAL has done the work, and there are no sites within sight of the water that are over 300 feet. So I said, well, refer to your document. Refer to number 7 of your photographs with simulation. The representative from PAL, which is Public Archaeological Laboratories, said, we reviewed that property. There is nothing there. And I said, excuse me, go back and check. I said, that's an ancient burial ground, and it's a ceremonial site, and they're both recorded. Well, they had to change that in their next document. They didn't care much for that, but that was fun. But that's how they will do. They will try to take, and they will take, and they will not notify you. And that failure allowed us to get a second shot at the apple, because they were almost ready to close it out. Lack of understanding.
Yeah. Well, as you can see, not only Army Corps but MMS focused on known historical properties. So that means they didn't come to us, as Chucky has just given you a good example of. And they only worked with Mass Historical Commission. So Mass Historical Commission / State Historic Preservation Office wouldn't have all the information we have. Okay. Probably their biggest problem also in the beginning is they didn't understand government-to-government consultation, which is tribe to the federal agency, and having all the stakeholders in with the federal agency. Because we are not going to talk about our sacred and our sensitive sites or any history in a public forum. When we have the federal agency one-on-one, yeah, because we can tell them, well, you can't make this public, but we will discuss this with you. And they clearly could not understand what they should have been doing and giving us, I think probably the best word is the respect that was due as a sovereign nation. And I think on the whole, we find that with any government agency, even for us where we are in the state, we don't find that respect as a sovereign nation. We don't find it among the neighboring towns very often. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir for a lot of tribes. But that's part of the battle.
36 CFR 800.4B1 that says, an agency must take, I've lost my words. They must do due diligence on research. They must try to contact everyone that they must, whether they need to do research, whether they need to go out and do face-to-face interviews. They need to put forth a good faith effort. I know I tried
There's a good faith.
a good faith effort to determine what's going on here and how to establish the area.
I'm going to go over to the map. I feel like Vanna White. Okay, so this is Nantucket Shoal, this area here.
Horseshoe Shoal.
Huh? Horseshoe Shoal. This is Nantucket Sound, but this is Horseshoe Shoal. What's referred to as the donut. Because how did that happen? It actually happened because back in the late 70s, early 80s, the state was trying to make it a marine sanctuary because it was so sensitive. And in order to make it easier, they decided to make it federal waters. And then the administration changed in D.C. Not so, it wasn't focused on preserving things. And next thing we knew, it was eligible for a wind farm. This map is actually a draft map from Minerals Management Service that got out to the papers. And no, we did not give it to them. I was surprised as everybody else when it showed up in the local paper. All these boxes are to be leased for renewable energy. That's the way it's set up right now. This dark line is set aside for wind development.
4,000 square miles.
Okay. This is Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket. This is Cape Cod. Chucky's over there somewhere. This is where my this is where my reservation is located. Aquina. It was formerly known as Gay Head. And this is Oak Bluffs. Oak Bluffs, Edgartown Road, the beach, where you go. And you can see an opening here. So when I was talking about the legend, you do his foot and do it here. We ended up here. In our legend, he creates Nantucket. So when the National Park Service came for the eligibility, and they were saying, well, Nantucket Sound, the proponent, Cape Wind, said, well, it's not Marshall made Nantucket Sound. Like, oh, of course he did. Because if that's not there, that's all open water. He made Nantucket, so he made Nantucket Sound. MMS didn't have that information because, you want to know why? When I invited MMS to come to see the pageant, they couldn't make it. A week's notice, they couldn't make it. I sent them a very nice letter. But this is about 8 times the size of that.
In Nantucket, inside the Sound, the Horseshoe Shoals is 24 square miles. It's 4,000 square miles in what is proposed. The one lesson MMS did learn from the Cape Wind project is that they have involved the tribes in a task force to now review their ocean plan. OCS is what they call it, off continental shelf. And that is what is being proposed for winds. Well, besides that, there were 3 alternatives that were offered to this project. And one was south of Tuckernut, one was Nantucket Shoals, and the other one was Monomoy Shoals. Now, all of those areas would not interfere with tribal custom or tribal ceremony. They were all given to us in the document as alternatives. When we put it on the table and asked them, they said, oh no, those are valid alternatives, but we don't have a project for any of those sites. We, shortly after, found out that the proponent had achieved the impossible. He had gotten the United States government to draft him a reg that if he put a test tower out in the middle of Horseshoe Shoals, that he would virtually own that property. Even though it was public land, it would not go into a bid process. It would not go into any kind of extraordinary review. The review that he had paid for would be sufficient.
In addition, about those alternative sites, when it says you should consult early, had we been in on that analysis, I don't believe Horseshoe Shoals would have been in the picture because of the cultural concerns, because it was so important. I'm assuming it would have probably been either Nantucket Shoal out to the east or under Tuckernuck. But we were not in that discussion. So basically, they made their decision on environment, on the birds, on everything else, but no cultural context. And that has been probably one of our biggest arguments, that right from the get-go, right from the very start, this was wrong. Oh, no, you can't press the button.
Of course I can. If I do it, it'll turn off, and then I'll be disappointed. Well, I mean, Jess, this is what I was saying about, where you need to find out who the federal agency is that's involved, because they're going to be dodging you. But as long as you have a cultural resource that is there, and I looked up the regs at lunch, is because of this. And I mean, besides Section 106, all right, in order for them to do anything on an area that a tribe considers sacred, they've got to go through the National Environmental Policy Act, NAGPRA, American Indian Religious Freedoms Act, and the Archaeological Resource Protection Act. And then they've got to go through 101D, 6A, properties of traditional, religious, and cultural importance to tribes qualify for eligibility on the National Register.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Well, this slide was to show you, this is from my reservation lands, and as you can see, the sun's coming up, but that's the island that's in the middle, and that's why we have to go down to the other end of the island. And that's that reg where it doesn't have to be on your reservation land if it is culturally important to you.
And that's the reg that applies.
Oh, this thing here.
All right. MMS, the second step that they should have done besides initiating was to apply the National Register criteria to Nantucket Sound. Well, MMS decided they wanted to take a shortcut. So they got on the telephone to the Park Service. They called up the Park Service and they said, is there anybody there that can tell us about a traditional cultural property being a body of water? And whoever they spoke to told them, no, it can't happen. Can't happen. Well, they were wrong. It is eligible for listing, and we've proven that. That all comes from the lack of initiation of consultation with the tribes. We told them, we were telling them right along that this is sacred property to us. They tell us now, well, the proponent has invested $40 million in this property, and you want him just to walk away? He's invested $40 million in all the slanted ads against me personally, and I'm just not going to get upset about those? I mean, I wish I had to put in the slide, because it's one of my favorite blogs. They say, Chucky, what do you want, a casino or religion? And then they have a picture of the Mohegan Sun Casino on stilts out in the middle of the Sound.
Yeah. The failure to apply for the determination of eligibility, it was June 2009, and I've got MMS lined up across the way because it was at the full stakeholders meeting, and I said, who's read the 106 regulations? None of them held up their hand. Well, no wonder the 106 is going so poorly. At that meeting, they had set up the meeting to discuss a memorandum of agreement. They could not have even thought of what the adverse effects were yet, because they hadn't got the determination on the sound yet. So you can't get what the adverse effects are, but yet they are trying to mitigate them at that meeting. So they said, well, where would you like to start? I said, right at the beginning, and I hauled out the regs. And I asked them, have you filled out the form and sent it to the shipper? I'm getting blank looks. Not one of them could even say yes or no. They're arguing, calling up national. I'm like, no, that's not how it's done. Look in the regs. You have to fill out the form and send it to the shipper. That's the proper step. Now, do I agree with that? Not really. But that's another battle for another day. Because the real battle was to get this project stopped. Then they canceled our consultation in July. Finally came in August. That's when I learned you don't go to a site visit and try to cram 10,000 years in. It doesn't work. But what was interesting in September, at least my letter went to the keeper in September. I'm not sure when yours went. We both wrote to the keeper and said we wanted a determination. And she wrote us back, rightfully so, according to the regs, that this isn't the way this should be done. But in October, MMS finally sent that form to the shipper.
Well, that was sort of initiated by, at that next meeting, ACHP sent their director, John Fowler, to the meeting. And unusual to the way that Tina and I usually work, she's usually bad cop and I'm good cop. Well, we switched roles that day because I was pretty upset with how I saw it going, because John Fowler was starting to spout regulations at me about how they could come to an MOU and the tribes had no say because the land was not tribal land, and that a regulation had just been developed that lands under the water could not be considered tribal land. So I became somewhat inflamed and asked them about the alternative sites. One of the vice president for Cape Wind Associates, a gentleman named Dennis Duffy, says Cape Wind Associates will approve no other site than Horseshoe Shoals. So he put John Fowler in a position, because John Fowler was quoting the regs to me, but then he was in a position where he had to listen to the regs, because the reg says alternatives will be considered. And when the proponent said that, that stopped the MOU process in its tracks. And John Fowler required that they now go and get a written determination from the Park Service on all of the properties. There was 26 buildings that were considered historic properties, plus the sound and 3 sacred sites to the tribes. He required them to go and do the research and get in touch with the Park Service.
Okay, can I move it? We did this. What's that? So, oh, sorry about that. I didn't
Yeah, you don't want to.
Well, we talked about that, didn't we? This is really sensitive. Can I just say that?
That's why I didn't touch it.
Yeah, thanks. It won't do it. And I'm hitting these arrows, too. We just want to talk about termination?
Go backwards.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. All right. Now, this is important because Bulletin 38 came out about traditional cultural properties. A guy named Thomas King, who was never really a great friend of the Indians before, but he's getting better. He wrote a bulletin about traditional cultural properties. And the bulletin makes such simple statements about what you should be doing as an agency. CFR 800.4B1, a federal agency must make reasonable good faith effort to identify historic places subject to efforts by their projects. If they'd done this according to the bulletin, they'd know.
Okay. Predetermination. So Army Corps was out of the picture. As soon as they could get rid of the project, they handed it over to MMS. They did not go and seek a determination on the property. So that's 2004. MMS comes in on 2005. No determination. So now it's been determined eligible, which elevates its status. And basically what MMS has done throughout the process is if they missed a step, they would go back, do it, and then keep right on moving. It's what we call checking off the box. Oh, we've done it now. Keep moving. But what ended up happening is it was going up the ladder. And in February, Secretary Salazar actually came to Mashpee and Martha's Vineyard. We know of no other time that the Secretary of the Interior has been in a decision like this.
106 consultation.
It's basically unheard of. And after his visit, it was clear. We did have additional meetings with MMS representatives. It was clear there was no mitigation acceptable to the tribes.
The proponent did offer us mitigation of $1 million over 20 years as mitigation of our sacred land, which would work out to about $50,000 a year, which in reality doesn't meet one tribal council salary.
And basically it is, we understand that we're on the forefront for this. Is it a place that we would choose to be? With my sleepless nights? Other worries? Probably not, if I had a choice. But it's not my choice. And I truly believe it's not meant to be my choice. I truly believe this is here and now for a reason. And that I am here for a reason. We know as the Wampanoag, some of our decisions have had long-lasting effects for the rest of Indian country.
We had a poor immigration policy.
Sorry, guys. But we also understand that with this project, however it falls, we also know that will probably follow its way through Indian country also. We don't want other tribes having to go through this type of Section 106 consultation. That is not what it was meant to do. And we want to send a strong message. We want the Secretary to send a strong message. This is not acceptable. This is not how it's supposed to be done. This is not why these regulations were written this way. That is not the spirit in which they are written.
After consultation, the Secretary sent it to ACHP for a ruling. Tribes have the traditional knowledge and expertise. Federal agency needs to stop, look, and listen, not pause, glance, and ignore. Tom King. If you do it right, if you really consider alternatives, if you really consult, if you really be considerate, you can probably get your project done. Another by Tom King.
I had a reporter ask me if I thought renewable energies and cultural concerns could coexist. And I go, of course they can. Our tribe is not against renewable energy. We're not against wind. We're going to be putting up our own wind turbine, hopefully, on a Superfund site, a very small Superfund site, but we can't use it for anything else. So let's use that. That's real renewable energy. But an industrial size wind farm the size of Manhattan on our sacred site is not what we consider acceptable. Now, all the rest of the arguments we can also come in on what it will do to our fisheries, which will affect our tribal members, which will affect the conch, which we use in creating our wampum. And as ceremonial practices, and worrying about whether they're going to actually disturb our ancestors. This is, just press the button because it's
Termination of consultation. Well, we, the consulting parties, failed to come to a conclusion of an agreed solution. So the Secretary requested comments from the ACHP. The ACHP provided comments, and those comments supported the SHPO, the keeper, and the tribes. They also agreed that these lands were too valuable and too sacred and too important to the nation to be affected. You can go online and find that. But here's the problem. You can click by it because I pretty much know. The Secretary can override all of that, all of the process, all of the past 9 years. He does not have to accept what the ACHP, what the SHPO, what the keeper, the National Register. He does not have to accept any of that. He can, with a stroke of his pen, give us that. That picture was taken from Papaneset, and then a computer simulation of the project was done on top of the photograph. That picture is from the same place as the picture that you saw early in the slideshow that I took from Mashpee. Papaneset means our summer place. That was where we went, and that's where we lived in the summer. The Succonesset Point was a place of great sacredness. It was the place where Masha placed his wife when he left us. It is a place where we hold our solstice ceremony. It is a place that is sacred to the Wampanoag people. That view shed that I showed you in the beginning, as you will notice, those turbines will eliminate that where that sun breaks the horizon. That'll be the destruction to us as a tribe, part of our culture.
And that's just it. The letter that was sent to us, letting us know they provided their final comments on the 2nd. And they recommended that the Secretary do not approve the project. And they also put in a number of recommendations to improve the planning process, which would be very helpful. And so basically ACHP says, we're done. And now it's up to the Secretary. And as of last night, there was no comment from the Secretary on the website. So you can well imagine that we're waiting with bated breath because ACHP had up until the 14th to issue their comments. So they were 12 days early. So anytime within the next 2 weeks is when I expect the Secretary to issue his what I hope to be denial of the project. I do not know what will happen if the project is permitted. We may have steps afterwards. I do not know at this point. Yeah, I mean, there are other avenues. We just have not put our energies into researching them yet. We've just done background work. So, anything else or just questions?
We have the American Indians Religious Freedom Act is our only last bullet in the gun. But one point I want to make as tribal people is that there is no even ground. There is no fairness. There is only justice if we all stand together. United South and Eastern Tribes has supported us with 4 resolutions. The Aquinas, the Narragansetts, all of our local tribes have been there for us every day. This has been 9 years. 9 years that we've battled this. It's down to a couple of weeks. This picture you're looking at is the secretary. He was at a sunrise. That is from the same spot as the picture you just saw with the turbans. He is the last man on the totem pole right now to make a decision, and we don't know which way he's going to go. Everything I'm hearing out of the department is saying he's going to approve the project. And if he approves the project, I think he needs to hear a loud voice from Indian country. Because this is the beginning, guys. This is the beginning. And I mean, once agencies figure it out that they can walk over us still, they're going to pick it up. And that's a fear of mine. Click.
I think that's it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Question. Oh, your fault.
Any questions?
Going once, going twice.
What kind of support could there be from the South Indians? And I ask that because in 2001, I took one of those tourist guided trips through Taos, and one of the things they went into very colorfully was the legend. They believe that they are responsible for bringing the sun to life and guiding it around. And to me, there's a big connection between what you're saying and the sunrise and what I remember hearing. In fact, that was right before 9/11. I was out there at that time when 9/11 occurred. Could there be any support? Because there may be other people, too, who have this calling in their life.
Yeah, we got a letter from the San Carlos Apache supporting. They had a very similar sacred site being threatened. We had Chuck Sams, who is, his people are from the Southwest, and his grandparents told him, if you ever get east, thank the people of the east for bringing up the sun and sending it our way. I think one of the problems, no, that's not the right word to use. One of the issues that federal agencies have is that they cannot get ethnographic data. They need to hold it here or it doesn't exist. So for Native people who have an oral tradition, you're not going to find it. The best example, I was actually to tell ACHP, and I didn't realize it, my father and my aunt were interviewed for a book. And in one of the chapters of the book, they're talking about a certain subject. And the author goes, I could not find any examples of this in Aquinas, so it doesn't exist. And I'm reading it going, no, he didn't tell you. And then I realized how precious. I knew the information was important, and I knew it was precious to me. But then it really, and I think part of it is because of this project, I realized, no, he gave that to me. So I hold it. Nobody else. Nobody else can be the expert. Only the tribe can be the expert. And those things that we pull from each other. And I mean, I get positive energy when I go places like this, and I can hear, and I hear other people having these battles. It gives me strength because I know I'm not alone. And we need that support to each other and from each other. Because as Chucky said, there is no fair playing field. We need every what I call all the smart people, because I'm back there. You know, I need all the energy and all the good thoughts to battle these things, because we are still under siege. If they haven't taken the land, they haven't taken our language, if they haven't taken our cultural practices, now they want all the natural resources that our properties hold. And for us, everything's interconnected. We can't give away one without getting out of balance. And for us, there, when you do your timeline, you guys are almost 200 years, 150 years, 200 years behind us. So we lost our languages, my grandmother remembers her grandmother. So that's about 1910, when conversational Wampanoag went away. Now we're revitalizing it. But we see it happening now 200 years later. Your Western tribes, some of your Western tribes are having problems. It was so heartening to when the folks get up and they speak it, when they speak their language. Because you always know when you hear it, there's no mistaking. You know, this is a native language.
Any more questions?
Legitimate, so-called legitimate issues that it doesn't matter what color or what tribe or what religion. Are those two completely easily seen to be different? And could you actually bring one to be revealed into the consciousness to make it less a factor?
We go back to the point of religion that was brought up earlier today. Our religion and our culture is not accepted as valid. So, I mean, everything is sort of racism based. They don't accept that the fight is that this is sacred to us. This is a part of our tradition, a part of our culture. That's the fight. They do not believe in that fight, even though.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to exploit.
Yeah, and the whole thing, I mean, it seems like there needs to be more awareness just put out there so people can see it, black and white issue of this is bigotry versus this is a legalism. You know, that really just each and every child, each person is an American citizen.
When you go against a developer that is a multi-millionaire, I mean, in the last few months, and Tina can attest to this, because I'm the big mouth of the group, so they have been hiring newspapers, and I've been beat up by the best: New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Providence Journal.
That's for you.
The only good article I got was AP, and that was because he came down and sat with me to get the whole story. But I mean, it's when you see that someone has that kind of press power, it's hard to get an alternate version in there unless you've got the money to battle them dollar for dollar. And I mean, this guy we're dealing with, his name's Jim Gordon. He's got $40 million invested in this project. He's looking to get $100 million in federal subsidies for putting up one tower. As soon as he gets the first tower up, he gets $100 million in his pocket. He's determined. He's very determined. And he doesn't care what he has to spend on articles that say this, or even purchasing tribal members. And that's happened too. You know, there's no even playing field. You cannot buy the press to do what he can do.
Yeah.
Everything's about money.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It's all about the money. Yeah.
I had one gentleman back in the corner.
Yeah.
All right. See that, Kenny? You thought it was going to.
He is
Yes.
Yeah, because up to the 7th, right?
Up to the 7th. If anyone feels like writing him, giving him an opinion, go for it. Because up until the 7th, he is taking comment.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.